My name is Wendy Dixon, and for most of my life, I've been excellent at standing quietly in the background. 3 weeks ago, my parents hosted a lavish dinner to celebrate their 40th wedding anniversary. 30 guests filled the house, friends from church, neighbors with perfect lawns, former co-workers who loved reminiscing about the good old days. Laughter echoed off polished walls. Champagne glasses clinked. Everything looked exactly the way my mother wanted it to look. That night, my father stood up, tapped his glass, and smiled like a man delivering good news. "We've decided to celebrate again," he announced. "Next week, we're taking the whole family to Hawaii." The room erupted in applause. My sister gasped. People cheered. Someone whistled. And for a moment, just a brief, fragile moment, I let myself believe I was included. Palm trees. Ocean air. My first real vacation in years. I smiled and asked the simplest question in the world. "What time is our flight?" The reaction was instant. My father's smile froze. My mother's expression tightened, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. 30 conversations died at once. 30 people turned their attention toward me. My father cleared his throat. "You don't need to worry about that, Wendy," he said. "You're not going." Silence fell like a dropped plate. "You'll stay behind and take care of the kids," my mother added calmly, as if she were assigning a seat at dinner instead of erasing me from the family. 30 people witnessed the moment I officially stopped being a daughter and became unpaid labor. I nodded. I always nodded. But what they didn't know, what no one in that room could possibly imagine, was that I had a secret. One I'd been quietly building for 3 years. And that night, standing in my parents' perfect living room, I finally decided I was done being invisible. Backhand index pointing right. Before we go any further, take a second to like this story if it resonates with you. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and comment below where you're watching from. To understand why that night changed everything, you need to understand my family. The Dixons live in a pristine colonial house outside Boston. 4 bedrooms. 2-car garage. Lawn trimmed to HOA standards. The kind of house that silently announces success to anyone driving past. My father, Harold, retired from banking 3 years ago. My mother, Patricia, has never worked outside the home, but she treats managing appearances like a full-time executive role. Then there's my sister, Megan. She's younger. Louder. Married to a corporate attorney whose job title my mother mentions like it's royalty. 2 children. Luxury SUV. Prime driveway parking. And me? I drive a 10-year-old Honda Civic that lives on the street. I work remotely as a part-time accountant. Flexible hours. Modest income. Nothing impressive by Dixon standards. And because my schedule is flexible, my time has never been considered valuable. Holidays. I cook. Clean. Organize. Birthdays. I entertain kids while everyone else relaxes. Vacations. Apparently, I stay behind. I used to think this was normal. That families just work this way. But the truth is, when you're the reliable one, people stop seeing you as a person. They see you as a resource. And resources are meant to be used. That night, after the applause faded and the party continued without me, I stood alone in the kitchen washing dishes that weren't mine. And for the first time in my life, a thought settled into place, quiet, steady, undeniable. Staff can quit. And I was closer than anyone realized. Backhand index pointing right. If you've ever felt like the helper in your family, the one everyone relies on but never notices, stay with me. Because what I did next changed everything. I didn't cry that night. That surprised me. After the announcement, after the humiliation, after the guests politely pretended not to notice what had just happened, I simply returned to the kitchen and kept working. Plates. Glasses. Napkins. Muscle memory took over. That's the thing about being the dependable one, you don't break down when you're hurt. You keep going, because stopping feels selfish. Growing up, I learned early that my role in the Dixon family was simple: be useful. My sister Megan never had to ask where she belonged. The spotlight followed her naturally. Teachers praised her confidence. Relatives laughed at her jokes. My mother introduced her by her achievements, then later by her husband's career. Me? I was introduced as Wendy. Sometimes with an add-on, she helps out. She's very reliable. She's always available. Available. That word shaped my entire adulthood. Thanksgiving morning started before sunrise. I'd arrive early to prep the turkey, polish silverware I wasn't allowed to use, and arrange flowers exactly the way my mother liked. Megan would show up hours later, dressed beautifully, greeted like royalty, and sit down to be served. No one questioned it. Least of all me. Christmas was the same, just louder. I wrapped gifts because my mother's arthritis acted up, though it never stopped her weekly bridge games. Birthday parties for my niece and nephew meant 8-hour days of organizing games, wiping frosting off faces, and hauling trash bags while Megan took well-deserved breaks. Once, just once, I asked if I could skip a family gathering because of a work deadline. My mother's voice went flat. Family comes first, Wendy. I apologized. I always apologized. Backhand index pointing right. If this sounds familiar, if you've ever been made to feel guilty for wanting your own time, pause for a second and hit like. You're not alone. The truth hit me in a quiet moment. I was scrubbing a pot in my mother's kitchen one random Tuesday night when I realized I couldn't remember the last time anyone invited me somewhere without expecting something in return. Dinner meant dishes. Visits meant babysitting. Holidays meant labor. I wasn't included, I was assigned. 3 years earlier, my life had already fractured in a different way. I'd been in a long-term relationship, the kind where future plans are assumed. Marriage. Kids. Stability. Then one evening, my partner sat across from me and said something that echoed louder than shouting ever could. I love you, he said, but I'm not in love with you. You're just there. Just there. Furniture. Wallpaper. Useful, but invisible. After he left, I wandered into a pawn shop I'd passed 100 times and never entered. On a shelf behind the counter sat a used DSLR camera. Scratched. Affordable. Forgotten. I bought it without telling anyone. That camera became my secret. I started photographing people no one noticed, elderly women waiting at bus stops, night janitors wiping already clean floors, hands worn down by decades of work. People society walked past without seeing. People like me. I posted anonymously. No name. No face. Just the images. Over time, strangers found my work. They followed. They commented. They understood. But my family never knew. Because good things weren't supposed to belong to me. So when my parents announced their Hawaiian vacation, when 30 people watched me be erased with a smile, something inside me finally shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. I wasn't angry. I was clear. That night, as laughter floated in from the living room and I washed the last dish alone, I realized something important. They had already decided who I was. But they had no idea who I was becoming. Backhand index pointing right. And before I tell you what that secret really was, the one that changed the balance of power completely, make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss what happens next. For 3 years, I lived 2 lives. One was the version my family knew, the dependable daughter, the flexible aunt, the woman with nothing pressing going on. The one who showed up early, stayed late, and never asked for recognition. The other life existed quietly, tucked away where no one could interfere with it. It lived in the back of my closet, wrapped carefully in an old scarf. The camera. I didn't tell anyone about it at first. Not because I was hiding something wrong, but because I was protecting something fragile. Every time I'd shared excitement in the past, it had been minimized, redirected, or quietly dismissed. So this time, I kept it to myself. I spent evenings walking neighborhoods most people ignored. Bus stations. Side streets. Early mornings before the city fully woke up. I learned how to wait without rushing, how to watch without intruding. Photography taught me patience. It also taught me how much of the world goes unseen. Faces lined with decades of effort. Eyes holding stories no one had bothered to ask about. People who existed on the edges of everyone else's priorities. I recognized myself in them. I named the series Invisible Women. I didn't attach my real name. I didn't post selfies. I didn't talk about my life. I let the images speak on their own. And slowly, quietly, people listened. Followers trickled in at first. A few comments. Then more. Then messages from strangers saying things like, "I feel seen. This reminds me of my mother. You captured something I couldn't explain." By the end of the first year, there were thousands. By the third, more than I ever expected. Still, my family had no idea. To them, I was still just Wendy, the one who helped. Backhand index pointing right. If you've ever kept something precious to yourself because you were afraid it would be dismissed, tap like. That fear is more common than you think. There was one person who did know. My Aunt Ruth. My mother called her the family disappointment. She never married. Never followed the approved path. Instead, she moved to California decades ago and built a life around art and work she actually loved. My mother said Ruth had wasted her potential. I disagreed. Ruth was the only person who ever asked me what I wanted. We spoke every Sunday night. Quiet conversations my mother didn't know about. Ruth never rushed me. Never interrupted. When I finally sent her one of my photographs, her response made me cry. "Wendy," she said, "this is extraordinary." No one had ever used that word for anything I did. She encouraged me gently. Never pushed. Never demanded. Just reminded me, again and again, that what I was doing mattered. Then, 3 weeks before my parents' anniversary dinner, something unexpected happened. An email appeared in my inbox. At first, I assumed it was spam. A gallery in California had found my work. They wanted to talk. I stared at that email for 20 minutes, heart pounding, convinced it wasn't meant for me. People like me didn't get opportunities like that, not without permission, not without validation from the people who mattered. I didn't reply right away. Because deep down, I was still waiting for someone else to decide if I was allowed to want more. That same week, Aunt Ruth called. Casually. Gently. "I hope you don't mind," she said, "but I shared your work with someone I trust." My breath caught. "The gallery owner," she continued. "He's looking for emerging artists. And Wendy, he's very interested." That's when it clicked. This wasn't coincidence. This was momentum. And suddenly, the night of my parents' anniversary, the moment I was told I didn't belong, felt different. Less like rejection. More like a door closing so another could open. I still didn't know exactly what I was going to do. But for the first time in my life, I knew this much. I had something of my own. Something real. And I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. Backhand index pointing right. And next, what I found by accident that night after the party shattered any remaining doubt about how my family truly saw me. The party didn't end when the guests left. For my parents, it ended with satisfied exhaustion, 40 years celebrated, appearances maintained, admiration secured. For me, it ended alone in the quiet aftermath, folding linen tablecloths that still smelled faintly of wine and perfume. It was nearly midnight when I realized I needed to send a file to a client. A deadline I'd pushed back, again, for my family. My laptop was at home. My mother's sat open on the kitchen counter. I hesitated for only a second before opening it. She borrowed my things constantly without asking. This felt fair. The browser was already open. Her email was still logged in. I should have closed it. I know that now. But then I saw my name. Right there in the subject line of a thread I wasn't meant to see. Something about arrangements and the Wendy situation. My hand hovered over the trackpad. Every instinct warned me to stop. But something stronger, something tired, pushed me forward. I clicked. And just like that, 3 years of self-doubt dissolved into clarity. The emails weren't angry. They weren't dramatic. They were casual. Efficient. Practical. Cold. My mother wrote that it made sense for me to stay behind with the children because I didn't have anything important going on anyway. She called it convenient. She called it helpful. She called it free help. Megan replied that it was sad, but useful. I read those words over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood. I hadn't. There it was in writing, everything I had suspected but never allowed myself to believe. I wasn't overlooked by accident. I was assigned my place deliberately. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I felt something else. Relief. Because confusion is exhausting. Truth, even painful truth, is grounding. I took screenshots. Sent them to myself. Cleared the browser. Closed the laptop exactly where I'd found it. Then I sat there in my childhood kitchen and finally let myself stop pretending. Backhand index pointing right. If you've ever discovered something that confirmed a truth you weren't ready to face, take a second to like this story. That moment changes everything. I drove home long after midnight. Empty streets. Streetlights blurring past my windshield. My apartment welcomed me with silence, the good kind. The kind that doesn't demand anything. I sat on the floor in the dark and stared at my phone. The email from the gallery was still there. So was a message from Aunt Ruth. I called her. She answered immediately. I didn't filter anything. I told her everything, the announcement, the emails, the realization. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said something so simple it felt revolutionary. You can leave. Just like that. No lecture. No guilt. No conditions. You don't need permission to choose yourself, she added softly. I learned that late. You don't have to. That night, I didn't sleep. By morning, I was packing. Not impulsively. Intentionally. 3 suitcases. My camera gear. My laptop. The scarf that had protected my secret for years. I left behind the apron that said World's Best Aunt. I didn't need it anymore. Backhand index pointing right. And before I tell you what happened when I finally told them I was leaving, make sure you're subscribed. This is where everything changes. Because walking away isn't loud. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside. But sometimes, it's the bravest thing you'll ever do. I didn't announce my decision right away. For 2 days after the party, I moved through life quietly, packing, sorting, deciding what mattered enough to take and what I was finally willing to leave behind. It felt strange how little I owned once I removed everything that existed purely for other people's convenience. The morning I decided to tell them, my hands were steady. That surprised me. I drove to my parents' house the same way I always had, parked on the street out of habit, and walked inside without knocking. My mother was in the living room surrounded by neatly folded clothes, already organizing outfits for Hawaii. Megan sat on the couch scrolling through her phone. My father was in his chair, newspaper raised like a shield. I stood in the doorway and cleared my throat. I need to tell you something. My mother didn't look up. If it's about the kids' schedules, Megan already sent you everything. It's not, I said. That got her attention. I won't be watching the children, I continued. I won't be here. Silence. Megan's head snapped up. My mother slowly set the clothes aside like she was handling something fragile. What do you mean you won't be here? She asked. I'm leaving tomorrow, I said. I have a work opportunity in California. The word California landed badly. My father lowered his paper. What kind of work? It's professional, I replied evenly. Something I've been building toward for a long time. Megan laughed once, sharp, disbelieving. You can't be serious. We planned around you. You planned without asking me, I said quietly. There's a difference. My mother stood. This is incredibly selfish, Wendy, she said. Family comes first. I nodded. Except when it comes to inviting me. That stopped her. Backhand index pointing right. If you've ever been called selfish for setting boundaries, hit like. That word gets weaponized far too often. The next 24 hours were relentless. Voicemails. Texts. Emotional appeals layered with guilt. You're tearing this family apart. Your father is heartbroken. The kids keep asking about you. Megan tried a different tactic. I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I need you. Need. Not I'm proud of you. Not I'm sorry. Just need. Then came the message meant to scare me. You'll end up alone. Just like Aunt Ruth. I stared at it for a long time. And for the first time, the threat didn't work. Aunt Ruth wasn't alone. She had built something real, on her own terms. Maybe that wasn't failure. Maybe that was freedom. I turned off my phone. That night, I walked through my apartment one last time. Beige carpet. Second-hand furniture. A life designed to stay small. I taped my spare key to an envelope for the landlord and slid it under his door. Clean break. At dawn, I loaded my car. The same Honda Civic my mother had always been embarrassed by now carried everything I owned that mattered. I didn't look back. The road was long, 5 days of motion, diners, rest stops, and unfamiliar skies. Somewhere in the middle of the country, I pulled over just to watch the sunset stretch across open land. I took a photo. My first as someone no longer waiting for approval. Backhand index pointing right. And next, what happened when my absence finally forced my family to see what they'd taken for granted. While I was driving west, mile after mile, state after state, my family was learning something they had never been forced to learn before. What life looked like without me. I didn't hear about it right away. I was too busy navigating unfamiliar highways, sleeping in roadside motels, and feeling something I hadn't felt in years, lightness. But eventually, the fragments reached me, pieced together through missed calls, half-written texts, and one unexpected email from my father. Hawaii, apparently, was not the dream they'd imagined. Without me there to quietly absorb responsibility, things unraveled fast. The kids were restless. Bedtimes became battles. Meals were stressful. Megan and Derek couldn't enjoy a single uninterrupted dinner because there was no one to just take the kids for a bit. No one remembered the routines. No one remembered the small details. The ones I had always handled without being asked. By the third day, Sophie developed an ear infection. Panic followed, not because it was serious, but because no one knew which pediatrician she saw or where the medical records were kept. That had always been my job. My mother complained endlessly. About the resort staff. About the food. About the noise. About how nothing was relaxing. What she never said, out loud, at least, was that the trip was hard without someone managing everything behind the scenes. Texts started coming in. Do you remember what Oliver eats when he refuses dinner? What drops does Sophie take? What do we do when he won't sleep? I didn't answer. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. Because every response would have pulled me back into the role I had finally stepped out of. Backhand index pointing right. If you've ever wondered what would happen if you stopped showing up for everyone else, this part matters. Like the story if you're still with me. Somewhere in Arizona, I stopped at a gas station and called Aunt Ruth. I'm about 8 hours out, I told her. Her voice was calm. Certain. Your room is ready. And the gallery owner wants to meet you tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow. The word made my stomach flip. I crossed into California the next morning. The Pacific appeared like a promise, wide, endless, impossibly blue. I rolled down the window and breathed in air that smelled like salt and possibility. I cried then. Not because I was sad. Because I wasn't. When I pulled into Aunt Ruth's driveway, she was already waiting on the porch. No questions. No expectations. Just open arms. Welcome home, she said. No one had ever said that to me before. Backhand index pointing right. And next, what happened when the gallery finally saw my work in person? Carmel by the Sea didn't feel real at first. The streets looked like something imagined rather than built, storybook cottages, art galleries tucked between cafes, ocean mist drifting through tall trees as if it belonged there. Everything felt slower, intentional, like no one was in a rush to prove anything. Aunt Ruth's cafe sat 2 blocks from the water. Blue shutters. Hand-painted sign. The smell of coffee and clay. She showed me my room above the cafe that first night. Simple. Bright. A desk by the window. A bed with white sheets. And beyond it all, the ocean. You'll help with mornings, she said over dinner. Afternoon, your time is yours. No guilt. No ledger. No unspoken expectations. The next morning, I tied on a plain apron, not the glittery one I'd left behind, and learned how to make pour-over coffee. Customers came and went. Locals greeted Ruth by name. Tourists lingered, unhurried. I smiled more that morning than I had in months. At 2 o'clock, I walked 3 blocks to the gallery. Coastal Light Gallery. I'd imagined something intimidating. White walls that judged you. People who made you feel small. Instead, the man who greeted me was warm, calm, and genuinely curious. He'd studied my work. Really studied it. He talked about light. About patience. About how rare it was to photograph people without trying to turn them into something else. You don't rush your subjects, he said. You let them exist. No one had ever described my work like that. He stopped in front of one image, an older woman waiting alone at a bus stop, hands folded, eyes tired but steady. This one, he said quietly. This is why I reached out. My throat tightened. I'd like to offer you a solo exhibition. For a moment, I thought I'd misunderstood. But he repeated it. 15 photographs. 6 weeks. The gallery would handle printing, framing, promotion. I'd keep the majority of sales. My name, my real name, on the wall. I signed the contract with hands that trembled only slightly. When I walked out holding that paper, the world felt different. Solid. Real. Backhand index pointing right. If you've ever dreamed of being taken seriously, of having your work seen, hit like. That moment matters. 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Printing proofs. Selecting frames. Writing descriptions. Learning to say the word artist without apologizing. Opening night arrived quietly. The gallery filled with people I didn't know, but who had come to see my work. Soft music. Champagne. Conversations about my photographs. Then I saw the red dot. A small sticker beside one of my pieces. Sold. My knees nearly buckled. By the time the room settled, I'd sold multiple pieces. Thousands of dollars. Validation I hadn't dared to expect. And then. The door opened. I didn't need to turn around to know. I felt it. Megan walked in first. Derek behind her. Still sunburned from Hawaii. completely out of place. They looked confused. Then they saw me. Wendy. Megan rushed forward, arms open like this was a reunion she'd planned. We've been so worried about you. The room grew quiet. She looked around at the gallery, the photographs, the guests. You did all this? She asked, stunned. I nodded. She leaned in, lowering her voice. I'm pregnant again. And I really need you to come home. Need. That word again. Backhand index pointing right and next, what I finally said when my family tried to pull me back into the life I'd escaped. Megan's words hung between us like a familiar weight. I really need you. Not I'm proud of you. Not congratulations. Not I'm sorry. Need. For years, that word had been enough to pull me back into place. To make me shrink. To remind me where I belonged in the family hierarchy. But standing there, in the middle of a gallery filled with my work, my name printed beneath photographs people had paid to see, I felt something different. I felt grounded. Megan, I said calmly, this is my opening night. She blinked, clearly irritated by my tone. I know, and it's nice. But we can talk about this later. I need to know when you're coming back. Before I could answer, Aunt Ruth stepped beside me. She's not coming back, she said evenly. She lives here now. Derek frowned, stepping forward with that courtroom confidence he wore so well. With all due respect, this is family business. Across the room, a woman with pearl earrings and sharp eyes turned toward us. I believe it became public business when you interrupted an exhibition, she said coolly. She introduced herself as a collector. One who had just purchased my photograph. The temperature in the room shifted. Megan's face paled as realization dawned. This wasn't a hobby. This wasn't a phase. This was real, and people were watching. She leaned closer, whispering urgently. Please. Let's talk privately. I didn't lower my voice. For 32 years, I had whispered my needs into corners. Not tonight. You can hire help, I said clearly. You can afford it. What you can't do anymore is assume my life belongs to you. Silence spread. I gestured to the photograph marked sold. That piece sold for thousands. Tonight, my work has value. I have value. Someone started clapping. Then another. The applause grew, not loud, not dramatic, but steady. Supportive. Megan's eyes filled with tears. Real ones, this time. I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief. I wished her well. Truly. Then I walked away. Backhand index pointing right. If you've ever had to speak your truth in front of people who preferred your silence, tap like. That moment takes courage. 20 minutes later, the gallery door opened again. This time, it was my parents. My mother walked in like she owned the space. My father followed, uncomfortable and quiet. Wendy, my mother said sharply. We need to talk. I intercepted them before they could cause another scene. You came all this way, I said. Why? You disappeared, she replied. You abandoned your family. I met her eyes. I wasn't invited to Hawaii. Remember? Her mouth tightened. That was one trip. Why was I the one left behind? I asked calmly. She answered without hesitation. You don't have children. You don't have a husband. You have time. That was the moment I knew. I pulled out my phone. And I read her words back to her. The emails. The ones she never thought I'd see. The gallery went silent. Faces turned. Pens moved. Whispers started. My mother had no response. Not anger. Not denial. Nothing. Staff can quit, I said softly. And I did. She left without another word. Backhand index pointing right and next, what happened when the truth followed them out the door. The gallery felt different after they left. Not quieter, if anything, it felt fuller. Charged. Like the air itself had shifted. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone near the back exhaled loudly, as if they'd been holding their breath the entire time. Conversations slowly resumed, but the tone had changed. Softer. More intentional. The applause didn't come all at once. It started with one person. Then another. Until the sound spread across the room, not thunderous, not theatrical, but sincere. Applause meant for me, not the confrontation, not the drama. For the choice. I stood there, stunned. Aunt Ruth squeezed my hand. "You did it," she whispered. I laughed, shaky and disbelieving. "I think I just publicly cut ties with my entire family." She smiled. "No. You set boundaries." Marcus, the gallery owner, approached with a grin that was half pride, half relief. "In 20 years, he said, I've never seen an opening night quite like that." "Is that bad?" I asked. "It's unforgettable," he replied. "That's what matters." By the end of the night, 8 of my 15 photographs had sold. 8. I stared at the printed sales sheet as if it might disappear if I blinked. The number beside my name felt unreal, more money than I'd earned in months of accounting work. For the first time in my life, I'd been paid for something I loved. Backhand index pointing right. If you're still here, hit like. Because this part, the quiet after choosing yourself, is where the real change begins. When the last guest left and the lights dimmed, Aunt Ruth helped me carry the remaining framed pieces upstairs. I set the check on my desk and just stared at it. Payable to me. Not helper. Not backup. Not available. Me. That night, I slept deeply. No anxiety. No guilt. Just rest. The next morning, the messages started. Not from Megan. From my father. His email was short. Careful. 3 sentences. He said he'd seen the photos online. He said he hadn't realized. He said he was proud. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a rhythm. Morning shifts at the cafe. Afternoons in my studio. Evenings walking along the water with my camera. The gallery exhibition closed successfully. Another was scheduled. A magazine interview followed. People recognized me, not as someone's daughter or sister, but as myself. And somewhere across the country, my family was learning to exist without the person who'd always held everything together. They reached out cautiously. Birth announcements. Holiday messages. Polite updates. The dynamic had changed. Permanently. Backhand index pointing right and next, how distance revealed what kind of relationship was actually possible once the roles disappeared. Distance doesn't erase relationships. It reveals them. Once the roles were gone, once I was no longer the default helper, the quiet solution, the one who absorbed inconvenience, what remained between my family and me was something fragile and unfamiliar. Choice. Weeks passed. Then months. Life in Carmel developed a rhythm that felt earned rather than imposed. Mornings at the cafe were steady and grounding. Regulars learned my name. Some asked about my photography. Others simply enjoyed their coffee and the quiet. Afternoons belonged to my work. Editing images. Planning future shoots. Meeting with Marcus about upcoming opportunities. Talking in terms like next exhibition and collector interest, words that once felt impossible now sat comfortably in my vocabulary. I didn't rush back to Boston. And no one demanded that I do. At first, my family reached out carefully, as if unsure where the lines were now. A photo of the new baby. A short holiday greeting. An update about school. Neutral. Polite. Distant. It hurt less than I expected. Because for the first time, communication wasn't built on obligation. It was optional. My mother called once. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was brief and cool, asking whether I planned to continue this phase, or eventually come back to reality. I deleted it. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Backhand index pointing right. If you've ever realized that distance feels healthier than constant contact, pause, and like this story. That realization is powerful. My father surprised me again. He sent another email, longer this time. He wrote about retirement feeling emptier than he expected. About how much of the family's emotional work I'd quietly carried. About how losing my presence had changed the house in ways he didn't know how to name. He didn't apologize outright. But he acknowledged something I'd waited years to hear. You mattered more than we understood. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it fixed anything, but because it confirmed that my leaving had been necessary. Megan reached out after the baby was born. A simple message. A photo. No requests attached. I sent congratulations. A gift card. Warm words. No promises. No availability offered. And something surprising happened. She didn't push. Life, it seemed, had forced her to adapt. The space between us wasn't empty, it was balanced. I realized then that relationships don't improve when you give more. They improve when everyone gives equally. Backhand index pointing right. And next, the moment I understood that walking away hadn't cost me my family, it had revealed who was willing to meet me where I stood. I used to think leaving would cost me everything. That if I stepped away, I'd lose my family, my identity, my place in the world. That fear had kept me compliant for years, silent, available, easy to overlook. But what I didn't understand then was this. Staying was costing me far more. By the time my second exhibition was scheduled, my life no longer felt like something I was borrowing from others. It belonged to me. The show was called Boundaries. Photographs of edges. Doorways. Shorelines. Thresholds where one thing ends and another begins. Marcus said it was my strongest work yet. I knew why. Every image came from experience. I had learned what it meant to stop crossing lines that harmed me. To stand at the edge and say, this is far enough. The opening was smaller than the first, quieter, more intentional. Collectors I recognized now greeted me by name. Other artists asked thoughtful questions. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was simply present. Backhand index pointing right. If you've ever feared that choosing yourself would make you selfish, tap like. This part matters. My family didn't attend. And that was okay. I no longer needed witnesses from my past to validate my present. Instead, I had chosen community. Aunt Ruth. The cafe regulars. Fellow artists. People who respected my time, my work, my boundaries. People who didn't need me to be useful to value me. I thought about my old life sometimes, not with bitterness, but with distance. I could see now how deeply I'd been parentified. How I'd been assigned responsibility without recognition. How my worth had been measured by convenience rather than care. Understanding that didn't make me angry. It made me free. Megan and I spoke occasionally. Carefully. Cordially. She didn't ask for help anymore. And I didn't offer it automatically. My father continued to email every few months. Updates. Reflections. Sometimes awkward attempts at connection. We were rebuilding something, but on different terms. My mother remained distant. And for the first time, that distance didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. Backhand index pointing right. And next, the moment I realized I no longer needed closure to move forward. Closure doesn't always arrive the way we expect it to. Sometimes there's no apology. No dramatic reconciliation. No moment where everyone suddenly understands what they did wrong. And that's okay. I learned that one quiet morning, sitting at my desk by the window, watching the Pacific roll in like it had done every day since I arrived. The camera rested beside my laptop, worn, familiar, no longer hidden. For years, I thought I needed my family to acknowledge the damage. To admit they'd taken too much. To say they were sorry. But what I actually needed was simpler. I needed to stop waiting. My life had become full in ways I once believed were impossible. I worked mornings at the cafe, where people greeted me by name, not because they needed something, but because they wanted to see me. Afternoons were for photography, editing, planning future projects. My calendar filled with commitments I had chosen. Not obligations. Choices. The magazine feature came out in early fall. My photograph on the cover. My story told carefully, respectfully. Names softened. Details blurred. But the truth remained. I had stepped out of invisibility. Messages poured in from strangers, women who had been the helper, the fixer, the one everyone relied on but never thanked. They wrote that they saw themselves in my story. That it gave them courage. That it made them question roles they had never chosen. I answered as many as I could. Because I knew how lonely that place felt. Backhand index pointing right. If you're watching this and recognizing yourself, take a second to like and subscribe. Stories like this matter because they remind us we're not alone. My family still existed on the edges of my life. Holiday texts. Birthday messages. Occasional updates. Civil, distant. Healthier than before. I never went back to Boston. Not because I was afraid, but because I no longer needed to prove anything there. The last message I received from my mother came months later. It was brief. Are you done with this phase yet? I stared at it for a moment. Then I deleted it. Not in anger. In peace. Because my life was no longer a phase. It was real. Built carefully. Intentionally. On my terms. One afternoon, while organizing old files, I found a photograph I'd taken years ago, a self-portrait reflected in a mirror back when I still lived in that small Boston apartment. The woman in the photo looked tired. Careful. Like she was waiting for permission to exist. I deleted it. She didn't need to follow me anymore. In her place stood someone who took up space. Who said no without guilt. Who chose connection over obligation. Someone who finally understood that love without respect isn't love at all. My next exhibition opens next month. 15 new photographs. Each one about boundaries, not walls, but clarity. About where responsibility ends and self begins. About learning when to stay and when to walk away. It might be my best work yet. Not because it's perfect. But because it's honest. Backhand index pointing right. And before you go, tell me this in the comments, have you ever been the one everyone relied on, and forgot? And if you stood at that crossroads today, would you stay, or would you choose yourself? That's the real story. Not revenge. Not victory. Just freedom.